Conventions are a huge part of any type of fandom, and The Office, despite ending a decade ago, still holds a pretty fervent fandom. So it makes sense that eventually a pretty sizable convention consisting completely of The Office actors and fans would occur. And while this isn't the first The Office convention, it's definitely the biggest. So I convinced my wife to go along with me, drove 10 hours, and attended the entire thing. This is a brief recap of my experiences. Before we go too much further, full disclosure going into this video, I did apply for an influencer badge, but I didn't get one or hear back or anything. Which, fair? My thoughts and experiences have nothing to do with any of that, and honestly, I probably have more to say because I actually paid for one of the VIP badges and got to see what that experience was like. So, speaking of which, let's talk about VIP badges. Before you even get to the event, you have some options for a few different tickets. A single day pass, a weekend pass, and then 3 options of VIP badges. $80 for Saturday admission, $50 for Sunday, and about $120 for a weekend pass. I got the bronze VIP pass, which ran me $249.95 per ticket for my wife and I. There were also the silver and gold VIP tickets, which sold for $369.95 and $499.95 respectively. Which, to be perfectly honest, is a bit of a ripoff. Last year's San Diego Comic-Con tickets were cheaper than that. Not to mention the differences with what you're getting with each ticket is kind of arbitrary. The biggest differences between the VIP and standard weekend passes were re-entry, a VIP area and buffet, a couple exclusive merch things, and that's it. Gold and silver badges were able to get into these express lines that were given priority when meeting cast members, who, by the way, you had to pay to meet and get photos and autographs with, which, to be fair, is a fairly standard practice that you see at a bunch of different conventions. We'll go through each of these perks while we go through the rest of the experience. So now let's go to the beginning. We're in Chicago. My wife and I meet up with Chris from Mulverine.
Hey, yeah, super excited to be a part of this video. Thanks so much for inviting me. I was excited for Reunioncon for months. I'm always working, and so I was really excited to just go and be a part of the fandom, experience the convention, and just have a good time. And fair warning, I am recording this in my hotel room, so it is going to sound a little bit off, so I do apologize for that.
And we grab some coffee and all head to the convention together. The lines to actually get into the convention were messy, to say the least. They were separating the VIPs into different lines based around their badge level, as well as general admission into a separate line from everyone. Also, just a pretty quick disclaimer, I didn't decide to make a video about this until the second day, so I don't have a ton of footage from the first day, so I'll be making some graphics to use, and most footage you'll see will be from day 2. Anyways, we're all separated into different lines, and around 10 a.m. we're allowed into the building. It's fairly messy, and the VIP lines kind of dissolved at this point. A lot of the cast members aren't there yet, but lines are beginning to start to form at their respective meeting booths. Or more specifically, lines are beginning to form in one particular area. You see, Rainn Wilson is only set to be there one day, and he's by far the biggest name on the list of cast members set to appear. So looking at this map, the line was set up to kind of wind around this area. My wife and I immediately got into line here. After about an hour and a half into the line, my wife and I find out that we're in the wrong line supposedly. That this is actually the silver and gold express line and we're not supposed to be in it. We did see someone a bit ahead of us ask about that and if they're in the correct line, and they got sent to the back of the general admission line. And we also saw some gold and silver VIP badges in the general admission line as well. So we did what we had to. We turned our badges around, crossed our arms over them. No one ever checked. Who I genuinely felt terrible for was the super nice guy in front of us. As I said earlier, you had to pay for photos and autographs. That's a relatively standard thing at a lot of different conventions. Rainn, of course, was the most expensive. The man in front of us was going to be paying in cash when he got to the front of the line. After we were in line for a few hours, he realized that he didn't have the cash on hand that he actually needed. I offered to cover him, but he didn't really want to go that route. We offered to hold his place in line while he went to find an ATM, but he never came back. And when I looked around the convention hall later, I realized I didn't actually see an ATM anywhere in here. So he would have had to have left, found an ATM, and then come back. He wouldn't be allowed to do that if he didn't have the VIP pass, which thankfully he did. Here's the picture we had taken with Rainn Wilson, who had laryngitis but was doing his best to power through it. By the time we got through this line, general admission had been allowed in for about an hour or so. The lines to meet Rainn, yes, even the VIP Express line, were going across the entire convention hall. It was to the point that if you wanted to go somewhere, anywhere in the convention hall, you had to walk through at least 3 lines, because Brian Baumgartner, the actor who plays Kevin, also had a pretty huge line at this point. That was also spanning a pretty hefty portion of the convention hall. In fact, the first day there were pretty lengthy lines for basically every major cast member who was there. After we got out of Rainn's line, we decided to wander around and see the sights and experiences that there were to do outside of meeting the cast members. But we quickly realized that, to be perfectly honest, there wasn't much to do outside of standing in line and meeting cast members.
Speaking of that, this is Chris, by the way. I had an entirely different experience over those first few hours of the event. I come from a long line of people who refuse to wait in lines, so the Office Con was gonna be no exception to that. When you and your wife said you were gonna wait in that Rainn Wilson line, I dipped out of there, abandoning you immediately to your fate. For me, the excitement of the weekend very, very quickly turned into disappointment. And that's because I realized that the event that I paid like $250 to get into was just the entryway to spend more money. And I also come from a long line of cheap people, so I wasn't planning on actually paying for autographs, and I virtually have no need for office swag. So I just kind of sat around.
Looking at the map and schedule, there was a pretzel eating contest hosted by Leslie David Baker, which ended with pretzels being left all over the VIP seating area. Beach Day Games, a paper plane contest, which I don't think ever took place, at least I didn't see it anywhere or hear anything about it if it did. Q&As happening throughout the day, a 2-way petting zoo, and the vendors. Which sounds like it could be a lot on the surface, but in reality was much less. Events like the Q&As and the pretzel eating contest were scattered throughout the day, so you couldn't really stop to go see any of that stuff unless it was already going on. The beach games consisted of 1 set of bag toss boards, 1 set of ladder golf ladders, and some sumo inflatables. By the time my wife and I did the sumo suits on the second day, you actually weren't allowed to wrestle in them anymore because of where they had them set up. Apparently someone on the first day got knocked down and almost took down the dividing wall between the official merch stand and the sumo mats. I asked one of the volunteers to film my wife and I as we sumoed, but they switched my phone off of video and took photos instead, which is a bit of a weird flex. The 2-way petting zoo on the first day consisted of 2 puppies and 3 different puppies on the second day, which, yes, they were adorable and adoptable, but I mean, 2 to 3 animals isn't exactly a zoo. It's like not even a group. There were a few different places to take photos of your own throughout the convention hall. There were a couple canvases hung up that made it look like you were in Dunder Mifflin itself, or it might have if they had taken the time to like steam some of the wrinkles out. There was a PT Cruiser with the M. Scott license plate where you could take photos of, or if you paid like $100 or so, you could get a photo inside of it with Kate Flannery on the front like you were hitting her. There was also Dwight's car that you could take photos in front of as well. There was a fake hay play set up, which was literally just a huge mound of hay, which I guess is pretty accurate to how it was done in the series, but still, it was just a bunch of hay in the middle of a convention hall.
The joke in the show was that Dwight was looking for cheap ways to make a lot of money with the littlest amount of work as possible, and somehow Dwight's in-show hay place had more to do than the actual Reunioncon did.
There were a few giant inflatables, one of which was Poor Richard's Tavern, which was described on the website as an inflatable bar. That is technically correct. But there weren't any seats inside of it. It was just a place where you could go into, buy a drink or two, then leave. The giant inflatable Dunder Mifflin, which was kind of hinted at as a cafe disco or something similar, was really just another merch shop. And aside from the VIP area and third-party vendors, that was it. There just realistically wasn't a ton to do outside of waiting in line, which brings me to my biggest theory about this whole convention. So at any fan conventions I've been to in the past, if you bought tickets online for a meet and greet, you were typically given a time so you weren't spending the entire day waiting in line to meet one person. That wasn't the case here. On the second day, I met some people who said they waited in line for 5 hours to meet Rainn and actually didn't even get a chance to. That's not on Rainn, that's either on the convention selling way more tickets than they were planning to, or just not having any plan in order to help deal with the lines. But I think they knew that they couldn't make the lines and waiting process go any smoother, because then people would have realized that there wasn't anything else to do. From what I've seen online since and heard from some people, they were and are offering refunds to people who paid to meet Rainn but never got a chance to, though those refunds were only for meeting Rainn. They didn't and couldn't do anything about the fact that most people were handcuffed to standing in one line for the entire day. They couldn't take part in and enjoy the Q&As. You couldn't hear them from the front of the line. In fact, they were calling these like bingo numbers throughout the Q&As, so it was hard to hear them half the time even if you were right up front. I talked to a few workers there who described this as the worst organized convention they've personally ever seen, aside from a Golden Girls convention some years prior, apparently.
So I did have a different perspective here because I wasn't handcuffed to that Rainn Wilson line. I instead was, just like waiting for something to happen. Right on time, though, the office trivia began at noon, and it was about what you'd expect. It was well done, and we had some fun. There was actually a specific trivia event company running that. And just real quick, as much as I've talked about The Office over the last couple of years on my channel, you'd think I'd be better at office trivia, but I'm not. A few hours later, the actor Q&A started, it really was the highlight of the event for me. And look, you can see the side of me in the picture that Robert Schaefer took and put on his Facebook.
There I am, Gary, there I am.
But if you squint hard enough, you're also going to see that extremely long line of people waiting for Rainn Wilson autographs. During the Q&A session, billed as the main actors, this was comprised of Brian, Kate, Creed, Rainn Wilson, and more. Well, Rainn was on stage for about 10 to 15 minutes until he stood up and just very awkwardly said, "Hey everybody, I need to get back to my booth. People have been waiting since dawn to get my signature, so I need to get back there." And the entire crowd then stood up and cheered, giving him the standing ovation and just, really excited about being in the presence of Rainn Wilson.
Let's pivot to the VIP area itself. The VIP area was one of the few places in the entire convention hall with any seating. So anytime you went into the VIP area, there were basically no seats to be had unless you stood there for 10-ish minutes and hoped someone was getting up. As far as the buffet itself goes, I only ever actually saw food on the buffet once. Chris saw pizza on the buffet a few times.
I was 2 people away from getting some pizza at one point.
But hot dang was it apparently going quick. So I never actually got food from the buffet myself. By the end of the first day, the VIP section was absolutely disgusting. There was garbage all over the tabletops, and they were absolutely covered in crumbs from the food that I never personally saw or got that day. Around this time, the after party portion of the first day commenced. This was split into a couple different spots. First, the vast majority of the cast had left for the day. Many tried to get through as many people in their line as they could, but even by the end of the day, Rainn's line was hundreds of people long.
I did notice that Andy Buckley, who played David Wallace, was still there well into the evening at his booth, talking and signing things for the volunteers who were working throughout that entire day with all of that line management stuff that was going on, which was a really cool move.
Then we got into a comedy show. It was fine. They brought in 2 comics who really had nothing to do with The Office, which is a bit of a weird thing, but whatever.
Well, in fairness, Denny Corby is from Scranton, and his family owns that pen paper building featured in the opening shot of the opening credits of the show, so there is that.
And then they had Chris Gaddard do a stand-up set, and yeah, he killed it. From there was a trivia show hosted by David Koechner, something that he normally just tours and does anyways. This was a pretty good time as well, but because I need to find something to complain about, during trivia I got up and tried to go to the bathroom. But all of the vendors were gone. That meant that there was security keeping people out of the vendor area. Great, good, that actually makes perfect sense if you're going to have people stay after the vendors leave. But let's take a look at that map again. To get to any of the restrooms, you had to go through the vendors area. And despite my asking, they weren't letting anyone. The only option would have been to leave the convention hall to find a restroom. But the night was almost over, and I legitimately wasn't sure if I'd be allowed back in. So instead I kind of just had to deal. At least one of the security staff who I asked seemed kind of perplexed by this as well and really couldn't offer any solutions. In terms of the number of people at the convention, it was an absolutely staggering difference between day 1 and day 2. While a lot of the VIPs were still showing up day 2 because obviously they would, most of them had spent hundreds if not thousands of dollars on tickets. But in terms of general admission, I only counted about 20 in line before the doors opened on day 2. And they just let general admission in with the VIPs that day as well, which I don't really care about too much, but that's just taking away some of the few perks that I, a bronze VIP card holder, actually had that hour before everyone else was allowed in to go through lines and meet who I could. My wife and I barely made it through 4 lines the first day: Rainn, Kate Flannery, Hidetoshi, and Andy Buckley's. And even then, it felt like we were barely making it through those. The second day, we made it through 4 lines before noon: Brian Bumgardner, Paul Lieberstein, Creed, and David Koechner. Not exactly small fries. They all had pretty sizable lines the first day, and while we did wait for most of them the second, we waited maybe 10 to 30 minutes maximum. I mean, we just straight up walked to David Koechner and Paul Lieberstein. Oh, and hey look, Sardar's here. This wasn't DashCon. It wasn't just an inflatable ball pit in the corner. They did bring in some big names, and if you paid enough, you could certainly meet the majority of them. But between paying for the best tickets possible to make sure you're able to get through lines quickly, buying all of the possible photo ops, and getting some things signed, you're looking at spending thousands of dollars. And some people absolutely love that kind of experience. But I don't know if what we've been talking about can really be called a convention. It's much more of an official/unofficial meet and greet. I can't in good conscience say that this entire thing was a money grab or that it was malicious, but having to spend thousands of dollars to go through the line slightly faster than normal and maybe meet a couple more of the cast leaves something of a sour taste in my mouth.
That's what she said, by the way. All kidding aside, I both loved and loathed this event. And while the Office Superfan Fest way back in 2021, by all accounts, including my own, was a complete another failure at every level of it, it seems like so many of the good ideas from that festival made it into this series of conventions, just with more money, bringing more star power. But I think it's fair to say that there was less focus on creating a positive experience for people like me who were just looking for a great time over the weekend. Bill, thanks for having me. I'm going to dip out. Y'all can find me at Mulverine or Office Place whenever this comes out.
I'd be curious to see what the people putting on this convention take from this experience. They've obviously made the right connections to get a lot of people there, both actors and fans. If they take what worked, make the right tweaks and changes, they could put on an absolutely amazing convention in the future. And I mean, why stop at The Office? Why not reach out and add some other huge NBC shows? Parks and Rec, Community, 30 Rock, Scrubs. All of these shows have pretty fervent fan bases and can make for a better experience in the future. I mean, I'd love to come to these conventions in the future and see how they change and evolve. Because, I mean, if they stay how they are now, they'll likely lose any bit of momentum they've managed to build. But anyways, this has been 10K Bill, and thanks for watching. Comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next. Support us on our Patreon if you like this content and want to see more like it. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.